Hi, everybody. It's Joe Chaffee here. I'm having some technical issues with YouTube today. I can't see you, so let me know if you guys can see anything. Do you see the shot of me with the map of the Northeast and of the East and the U.S. to the in the lower left? You do see it. Okay, good. So I'm just gonna ignore what's going on with whatever YouTube is doing. I just want to also welcome Edward Richardson can see me great, and Nicholas Gallo. Okay, excellent. I was trying to set up a private live stream for my Patreon members, but that didn't seem to be able to work out today for some reason. So we're going to have to combine you with everyone else. Let me just say right off the bat, for those of you who are uh, Patreon members, if you put a question in the chat and I don't get to it, it's because I'm scrolling through a chat board. It's hard for me to see. So just message me your question or your comment on the Patreon platform, and I will get it there for sure, and I will respond to you. Okay. I apologize for not catching every um, comment. There's just a lot going on because I'm trying to work a board here to move maps around and look at you guys on the chat at the same time and make sure that what you're seeing is what you're supposed to be seeing. So let's start off with what's happening this afternoon, because we have a busy Atlantic with respect to tropical systems, although there's nothing out there that's threatening and nothing that is really exceptionally strong. We have um, the system that is off the East Coast, this low pressure system, and you can see it here on the loop to the right. We've I want to point out a couple of things with this. First off, it's very broad. The circulation of this low covers several hundred miles from east to west. Actually, maybe a little bit more than that. But if you notice, first off, right near where the center is, and it's pretty clear on this visible shot where the center of circulation is, it's void of any clouds, and you have to move away by a number of miles before you start to see any convection, and that is the other problem. Up until today, it's been really void of any convection. We're seeing a little bit of thunderstorm activity that's developing east of the center in one of those rings that's running around. It looks like there's two bands that are developing, but this is still really a very broad low. We don't see a tightening around the center. We don't see a concentration of convection around the center. So this really just remains basically a low to mid cloud swirl. So until you get convection to really start to wrap around this, this is not going to develop much beyond what it is. And I don't, for those of you who are in the Carolinas at this point, I'm not really seeing any kind of impact from this other than when this next frontal zone sets up and this system approaches the southeast coast, it will more than likely just kind of get absorbed in all of it. The only way that wouldn't happen is that as it approaches the southeast coast, the conditions are slightly better with regards to getting better organized, but it's not going to have a whole lot of time, even if it did. And I don't really think the big issue, of course, will be any additional rains. And at the moment, I would say that it really wouldn't materially add to rainfall amounts, except maybe right along the immediate coast. I mean, that's kind of the way it looks at the moment. So I'm going to stay with that idea until proven otherwise. Ed Richardson, I'm sorry you're ill. I did see you mention that yesterday. Feel better, and thank you for jumping on to YouTube and subscribing, and I'll do my shameless self promotion a little bit later. I'm going to come back to the tropics in just a second. We do have on tonight here on the board. I did notice that we did have someone from. Where did he go? Did he disappear on me? Faded Apex, watching that tropical depression 11 that's east of the Windward Islands. and I'll get to that in just a second. But I just wanted to bring up the current U.S. radar because we do have quite a bit of rains going on today in eastern Louisiana, southwestern Arkansas, and still having some rains in Oklahoma. There were some amounts up to 8 inches in some places. I think Ardmore got 7 inches. There was a lot of flooding there. You got areas that went basically from drought to flood virtually overnight. And that rain is moving northeastward, and it's already, there's rain that's extending along the frontal boundary into southeast Missouri, southern Illinois, southern Indiana, northwestern Kentucky, and about to move into Ohio. So this is all part of the process of eventually getting this into the mid-Atlantic and into the Northeast, which today, by the way, is very quiet. The rest of the country also pretty quiet. A little bit of shower activity up in parts of the Northwest, but nothing too crazy at the moment. So I think what we'll do now is I want to jump over to, let me lose this. Hang on, I'm going to get rid of that. And let's start with the tropics. I'm going to start off with a loop that I don't really use too often, but it is very useful. I think it's certainly useful today because I want to illustrate what's going on with all these systems, because I think there's almost an automatic assumption sometimes that every tropical depression or tropical storm that develops is going to become a major hurricane, and it just doesn't work that way. You've got to have all the atmospheric dynamics lined up. And this water vapor image shows you the whole Atlantic, so we can actually see all the systems that are in play. So on the lower right, we have, and I mean lower right because this isn't even at 10 degrees north yet, and south of the Cabo Verde Islands, east of the African coast, we have Tropical Storm Kirk. And you can see the convection there, the water vapor imagery, the bright white clouds blowing up. And there is some turning going on. That's very clear that there is some rotation there. You look up in the central Atlantic now, go toward the center of the picture and toward the top, but not quite toward the top. You see that giant swirl. That is the, at the moment, non-tropical low-pressure system in the central Atlantic that is has the potential to become a subtropical storm in the next 24 to 48 hours, and probably will in the next couple of days, and may eventually become a totally tropical storm or even a hurricane down the road. So we've got that sitting in the middle. To the left of that is the system I just showed you, and the water vapor imagery does show the moisture buildup there on the east side of that broad center, but it is, again, very broad, and it's not in any rush to become a tropical depression. And as far as Tropical Depression 11 is concerned, that's the one that's east of the Windward Islands, south of the potential subtropical low. Notice that it is really relatively disorganized at this point. I'm gonna be curious whether they still keep it a tropical depression at 5 o'clock. I didn't look close at the tight visible, but what you can see is the moisture shooting up from the west-southwest to the east-northeast, okay? That's wind shear. Those are the strong upper air winds, and some of that actually is being driven by the upper air feature that's controlling the storm up in the central Atlantic. So faded apex, if you're worried about, you're in Grenada and you're worried about this, I'm really not overly concerned. Certainly we do not have conditions, and by the way, it's barely moving. So it's not even moving any closer to the windwards. It's still about 500 miles to the east. Even if it does decide to start moving along, you notice the clouds that are over the southern Windward Islands are all going from east to west. So your upper air winds there from the west are completely unfavorable for this system to develop much further. So the Hurricane Center is indicating that this is going to dissipate, and I agree with it. Kirk, on the other hand, will be in a favorable environment for a while as it moves westward. But once it gets past 40 degrees west, and depending on how far north it is, it probably will come under some hostile conditions that are going to be driven by the subtropical storm that will be to its north. While the system to the north is just a non-tropical system at the moment, you can see how broad the circulation impact is. If it were a tight tropical storm or hurricane, you probably would not see the southern boundary of those southwest winds going all the way down to almost 10 degrees north. So a lot of what happens with Kirk, a lot may ultimately depend on how fast that system in the central Atlantic becomes tropical or not. And it may also eventually have an impact on the track. And uh, other than that, I don't really see any of these being any serious threats with regards to land anytime soon. I'm just going to just want to pop up the chat board for 1 second. I assume everybody is seeing all of this, and you are, so that's great. Welcome to everybody who has decided that their Saturday afternoon um, is this is the problem I'm showing you on the screen. The problem that I'm having, and that I can't see what you got. I can't. I just can't. I just can't see. That's the basically. So as long as you're seeing everything clean, that works for me. It's coming up. It's at 4:31 Eastern time. So I think by the time we wrap up this video, we're going to be able to take a look and see what the new Hurricane Center stuff says. So why don't we look at? We'll start with, since we're on the tropics. Let's take a look. I'm going to go to the European first and foremost, and then we'll jump back to the GFS. I haven't really given the European a look today. And okay, so we're a little bit out into the future. There we are for this. This was how the European was initialized this morning with the low Kirk south of the Cabo Verde Islands. That's that 1,009 millibar low on the lower right. The 1011 low that you see in the southwest Atlantic, well east of the Florida coast, is our low cloud swirl. The 1,006 low that's in the central Atlantic, midway between that and the Azores, almost right in the center of the picture here, that is the potential subtropical storm. So why don't we take a look at what the European does with this? Again, this is the first time I'm looking at it. So by tomorrow morning, that low actually moves slightly westward. The system off east of Florida, very broad isobar there. Well, pressures are low, but again, broad. And then, of course, you have the reflection of Kirk southwest now of the Cabo Verde Islands. It holds it by Monday morning. The central Atlantic low virtually doesn't move. We've got a big high building in the northeast, and Kirk continues to move along to the west. Notice that the system that's off the Florida coast did not get any stronger from Sunday to Monday on the surface. It's just basically an open inverted trough that lifts up into the southeast coast of the United States. And then that all really kind of becomes part of this frontal system that is going to be approaching the East Coast during the middle part of next week. We're probably going to see some rains here Monday night and Tuesday that are going to be substantial. And there might be some rain tonight into tomorrow morning, by the way, in southeastern Pennsylvania, southern New Jersey, down into the Delmarva Peninsula and northern Virginia, back into West Virginia. Not a whole lot of rain, but there might be a band of rain in there, while dry air in New England, dry, cool air, tries to come down. Going forward, the Atlantic system kind of moves northeastward toward the Azores, so that would at least lessen the influence on Kirk as it begins to approach the Windward Islands. The other low is gone, and the European does pick up on something else south of the Cabo Verde Islands, which it loses. But you notice it never really develops Kirk very much as it approaches the windwards. That's not to say it can't develop, but the fact that it's not developing and the GFS is not doing anything with it, when the global models are not doing something with the system, you can probably be fairly confident that they have have the right idea. It's a little touchy with tropical systems because sometimes they can go their own way. But as you notice on that water vapor imagery, we don't have the best of conditions across the tropics as far as conducive for development or further development. The subtropical low nudges eastward toward the Azores by 96. Wait, I'm sorry. So 120 hours. So here we go. It's kind of moving southwestward at this point, and this is where it sort of looks like we're seeing the system look a bit more tropical in nature. Perhaps by the time we get to the middle part of next week, you'll start to see this. Kirk as a low is now west of the windwards and moving into the Caribbean. Again, not doing very much with that. Notice the highs that are on either side of the subtropical of the system in the central Atlantic. One off the west coast of Europe. I'm sorry, off the west coast of Ireland and Scotland, and the other high that is sitting over Newfoundland. So it's kind of trapped in between and trapped underneath the stronger flow that's up to the north. So it moves it a little more southwest by the time we get to 192, and then it just keeps meandering it around and actually weakens it over time. So it doesn't really do very much with it, with any of these systems, none of them through the 10-day period. So that at least it lends to some confidence here that we're not going to see anything um, terribly problematic in all of this. So coming back, I'll give you the GFS's view because it's really not that much different with these systems. There's your situation at the moment. When we get to this morning, you got that low, the Central Atlantic low, the low east of the Florida coast. Very tiny circle there south of the Cabo Verde Islands is Kirk. Moving along, the GFS, same ideas, by the way, with both the southeast coast system and with Kirk, not really doing much with either one. The Central Atlantic low just basically becomes more tropical and meanders around. In fact, if you watch this over time, it pretty much covers a very, very small geographic area over a 10-day period. It doesn't move a whole lot of miles. It basically goes over the same water over and over again. So that may eventually work against it as you start dealing with upwelled water. That the cooler water temperatures could prevent this from developing very much. The upper air looks it hasn't really changed in terms of the forecast and the things that we are dealing with in the upper atmosphere. Just going to double check here. I'm just double checking to see what we got. And okay, so you guys see okay, which is good. There you have this starting from, let me go back. Okay, so here's today. There's the upper, so you got those upper highs on either side, strong westerlies just to the north, running along and north of 40 degrees north. Somehow it doesn't get picked up. In fact, you get another strong short wave that drops in and drops the whole thing southward again. It's very bizarre. And in the meantime, when we move into next week, you have this ridge off the east coast that's oriented southwest northeastward as a deep trough drops down into the plains and Midwest. It's going to get very cool up in the Midwest and in the plain states. The problem here in the east is that with this ridge just offshore, we're going to be on the edge of that cooler air. Some of it will get in here just because it's the time of year where it's going to happen. But and the trough does extend into New York State in terms of the below normal heights. So the colder air, that bluer area you see there, does kind of push in. So I think you'll get that cooler air and drier air to bleed down at the surface. But notice in the longer range, you still have a flat ridge in the southeast part of the United States. The westerlies are only down into Virginia, North Carolina. The stronger flow, obviously, to the north. It's not going to get hot with this, obviously. And in fact, we're at least deep enough in the westerlies where we are going to see some air mass action coming down out of Canada. But moving at least out to day 10, that ridge is still there. It doesn't go away. And in fact, it shifts westward late in the period, if you want to believe the GFS. And we still have some evidence of it there through to out to 384 hours. But the difference is the strength of that ridge is not like how we saw during several occasions during the month of August and September. And there's enough going on here in Canada where we are getting troughs that are swinging down and around, and that you're going to get fronts to get through here. Roll it back, and you can see the upper flow. So you do get these short waves, and the jet in Canada is actually quite busy. Notice, by the way, also that as we've been saying with respect to these models and how they love to make these deep troughs that want to come into the east, and then as we get closer and closer to the events, the models start adjusting a bit for reality, and the troughs don't look nearly as amplified, and the ridge in the east becoming a bit more important. By the way, if you look down in the Pacific at this point, later in the long range at the beginning of the month, we do have three weather systems here, three tropical systems it seems, and one is going to come close to and probably into Baja. If there's a trough out here in the west, that would be the case. It would get drawn to Baja California, and this is the time of year where you usually start to see those systems. If you're going to see them, is if you start seeing deep troughs in the, or at least some kind of troughing out in the west, which is what we have. This is actually, when you look at this, if this is correct, this is a split flow that develops here. And what we mean by a split flow is you can actually see, you know what, I'll illustrate it. Hang on a second. Let's bring up the old draw map for you. I'll put it in the paint box. And okay. So you guys can see what I'm seeing. I'll just move the map over a little bit. And when we talk about a split flow in the atmosphere, okay, brush, patience, guys, I'll be right there. I'm just setting everything up. Okay, so if you follow where all the lines are tightly packed, the height lines, you've got a jet in the Pacific that comes down into Southern California, because you've got this big upper low that the model is forecasting to be in Washington State. And then that jet moves to the east and the base of those westerlies down into Northern Virginia. At the same time, you've got this other jet that is coming down out of Canada and into southeastern Canada and into New England. Now, in the wintertime, for example, a split flow can be dangerous with respect to potential snow events across the U.S., particularly in the eastern part of the United States, when you have a split like this, because you have one jet bringing down cold air, the other one feeding in moisture from the subtropical jet across the Pacific, and you wind up with issues. Not so much the case here because of the fact that you do have, first of all, it's September, obviously, and we do have a rather flat, but definitely a ridge that stands out here across the Gulf states. I am going to still stick with the idea that something may try to develop in this particular area as we go into the beginning of October. Perhaps with everything that's going on, maybe what will happen is that'll develop more on the Pacific side than on the Caribbean side or the Gulf of Mexico side. From run to run, we keep going in different directions with this. But anytime I see an upper high inland of the Gulf states and across the Gulf states like this, it usually lends to lower than normal pressures down in the Caribbean, in the Northwest Caribbean, and into the southern Gulf of Mexico. So you can have something come out of this of a tropical nature. So that, I guess, for a Saturday, that sort of wraps it up. There isn't too much happening today as far as severe weather is concerned. There are no organized areas of severe weather that are forecast by the Storm Prediction Center. I can at least, you know what, let me bring up the rainfall for this week, because it was pretty substantial. I'm going to just show you the GFS rainfall. Okay. And then maybe for laughs, we can take a look. I'm just going to go out a week on the GFS, because this is going to be a wet week here. We're probably going to have rain into Thursday. And, oops. Hold it. There we go. Okay, so here's your rain forecast. Maps, of course, courtesy of tropicaltidbits.com. And, you got this large stripe of 3 to 5 inch rains. Much of that's already going on. It's already underway. So this is in addition to whatever has already fallen from eastern Texas northeastward into the lower Ohio Valley, across West Virginia, and into Western Virginia, Johnny Quest, if you're watching today, and then into southern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Long Island. Is a large band of 2 to 4 inch rains. The surface on how this plays out. Okay, where are we? All right, so here's today. High building in. So there's a little lead wave that comes out. So for those of you that are watching from my zone, eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England and New Jersey, Long Island, a little bit of rain comes out tomorrow morning and only gets to just about to New York City. Very, light rain for the most part. And then it drops southward because the height of the north is beginning to press in. You'll notice off the southeast coast of the United States that low gets closer by Monday morning, but again, it doesn't really develop. The pressures don't really drop there. You don't even have a closed circulation, at least the way the model shows it. And by the way, that high builds pretty strongly east of Maine, so the gradient is going to tighten up a bit along the east coast. It might get it's going to get breezy and in some places windy later Monday night into Tuesday. The old cold front comes up as a warm front, and we get into a solid area of rain. While that warm front is to our south, temperatures are going to be stuck in the 60s. And then Wednesday, we get warm sectored as the warm front goes by, and then this next cold front approaches. So we may get back into the low upper 70s and low 80s on Wednesday, with the chance for some showers and thunderstorms Wednesday night into Thursday. No real strong push, again, because the strongest part of the jet stream is to our north and west. So the GFS certainly suggests that we could see this front get hung up, with more rain possible later Thursday night. And then finally, by next weekend, we get a push of dry air and some decent weather for a couple of days before we start the process all over again. So just to kind of summarize everything with respect to the tropics, yeah, it's busy, but the systems are all pretty much on the weak side. There are no immediate threats to land. We are not seeing Florence reborn heading into the Carolinas, as has been advertised by a number of folks out there. Okay, Timothy Veltman, I know you're busy. See you on the next one a little bit later. Um, you know, it was just it's. I said this yesterday. It was totally inappropriate to call this Florence coming back, and particularly because of how sensitive things are right now in North and South Carolina. Why would you do that? Okay, why would you even put out a tease that even suggests that when you know that the meteorology that's out there isn't really showing it? So I ask, I don't know, what kind of conscience do you have professionally? That's my question. Anyway, I'm on the chat board with you guys. Ed Richardson, you need to get better. We're above average now. We're on our 11th tropical storm. That's pretty much what we get on an average year. So at this point, 11th tropical storm, and we've got time for at least a couple more. I think the whole thing in the central Atlantic will become storm number 12. And you are right, Steve Schunerman. Sensationalism sells. That's why, and that's also why I don't do that. And I haven't done it since I've started my YouTube channel, nor will I do it. And let me put it this way: if I ever get nervous about a weather event that's going on, a serious weather event, it's one thing for me to say I'm nervous about a forecast angle that I'm trying to resolve. But if I ever get serious, that's the time for you to worry. Okay. If I'm not concerned about it, then I'm not concerned about it. And you're quite welcome. All right, let me just do really fast, because you know what? I need to do a shameless self-promotion, and please, by all means, continue with your questions or comments if you have them. But just to let you know, because I got my Patreon folks are on here, and my Patreon platform is basically a private platform where you will see my website posts, and you'll see private videos and all sorts of good stuff. Okay, that I'm not putting out for general consumption. Let's put it that way. And this is what it looks like. I'm going to put the link up on the chat board for those of you who might be interested in this. You get notifications. There's an app that Patreon has that you can use to pull up my page. You get notifications, and what we're interested here doing is basically setting up a community of just of weather folks with no flat earthers, no geoengineerists, no weather control folks, no HARP people, none of that nonsense. Okay, this is about meteorology and weather forecasting and all the fun that goes with it. Because a lot of I know that you like this stuff because it's fun, and I get that. This is what I've always wanted to do with all in my life, was to do weather, and I'm very fortunate that I was able to do it professionally. So now we can go gather in one place. So you can sign up for Patreon. It's $2 a month is the bottom tier. There's some higher tiers if you'd like. If you're feeling extra generous, I won't say no. It's a good way, it's a good, easy way to support my channel. It's $2 a month, the cost of a cup of coffee, and that's it. And a number of you have joined, and I really, really appreciate it. And so I'm going to put the link up on the chat for those of you who are interested. It also shows up from time to time. You'll see a little thing come up in the corner. A little icon comes up in the corner of the live stream or the video in the replay, and you can click on that, and it will take you to the Patreon page. And there you go. So there is the link to Patreon. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that we are a participant in the Amazon Services program here, and the Amazon Services LLC Associates program, which is an advertising program designed to provide a means for us to earn fees by linking to Amazon.com and its affiliated sites. So if you shop on Amazon, you can use this link. You're going to get your stuff if you're shopping on Amazon. You get your stuff. You're going to be shopping there anyway, and Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin, so I can get a couple of cigars for myself and a cup of coffee or two. So thank you very much for those of you who are using it. The link is on the chat board. Chelsea Campbell Kirk is going westward. I don't see anything with respect to Kirk. As far it is going to strengthen a little bit, but then it's going to hit a wall with those strong upper air winds that are taking apart Tropical Depression 11 east of the Windward Islands. And there's going to be some upper air interaction with the system that's in the central Atlantic, because that's going to produce hostile winds in the upper atmosphere down into the tropics. So it has some challenges along the way. After it's going to be okay, for the next 3 days, it'll probably be able to strengthen some, Chelsea. But after that, it's going to probably, it's going to run into some issues. I'm not particularly concerned about any of the systems that are out there as far as being land threats. And Kirk is pretty far to the south. Just to pull up Anthony Orr, our resident statistician. Thank God he's around, because Anthony, if it wasn't for you, I'd be totally lost sometimes. And I appreciate what you do. So let me just give you the new info on from the Hurricane Center. We have Tropical Depression 11 is forecast to become a remnant low tonight or Sunday. I think it's already there. Moving northwest at 3, it's at 13.6, 53.9. So it's still about 500 miles east of the Windward Islands. And that'll be gone. So I'm not really too concerned about that. So Kirk is 430 miles south of the southernmost Cabo Verde Islands, or about, I don't know, 1,900 miles from the leewards. I mean, it's or maybe over 2,000 miles from the leewards, I should say. And I can put up, we can show you the Hurricane Center's forecast. They do maintain it as a tropical storm through Thursday. I'm going to bring that map up. Hold on. Hang on, folks. As usual with these things, they're being evil with me for some reason. I'll bring up the Hurricane Center's map so you can see what their forecast map looks like for Kirk. And I'm going to, in the meantime, well, I can't actually do that. I can't even read the discussion, but here's the map, the way it looks. And, pretty much on a westerly course, maybe a little more west-northwest late in the period by 2 p.m. Thursday, just east of the northern windwards. And on the advisory, which, by the way, you can, nhc.noaa.gov is where you go for all this stuff. On the forecast discussion, I just want to see what they're doing here in terms of wind. Okay, so if you look at the bottom here of the forecast discussion, which tends to be on the technical side, okay, but I honestly believe that read it, even though it may not make that much sense to you. Just read it, because what happens is over time, the more you read these things, and it won't take you very long to read. First of all, if you do read that and there's something you don't understand, if you're a Patreon member, you can just message me and I will try to explain it to you. But you can see at least the forecast on the bottom, which is the plotted points of the map you just saw. But they also tell you the forecast wind speed, and you'll notice that they take it up to 50 knots, 60 miles an hour. This is by Monday morning, and then leave it there. And then they weaken it back to 40 knots, gusting to 45 at 120 hours, which is at that point where it was just approaching the windward. So they're obviously staying on the same idea of what they had earlier with respect to westerly wind shear. In fact, on the discussion, I just caught the bottom part of this paragraph. After 72 hours, Kirk should encounter increasing westerly shear and gradually weaken. The intensity forecast, which is unchanged from the previous forecast, lies a little above the intensity consensus. So they looked at what they did was they basically looked at all the intensity forecast models and just kind of took the middle of the road, which also means that some of the models showing it strengthening, some of the models showing it weakening. And in fact, I can at least vouch for that. Let me see if I can pick that up. And yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the intensity models here. You've got some of them that actually make it a hurricane by 60 to 72 hours. And there's a couple of models that actually leave it as a Category 1 hurricane all the way through its long range. The vast majority of them have this as a tropical storm between 45 and 65 knots. And there are some that weaken it down to less than 35 knots. So they just I think they basically just split the difference and leaned more towards the low end than the high end. The Hurricane Center will also tell you that with regards to the intensity forecast, it's that's where they have the biggest problem. The track forecasts have gotten pretty good. The intensity forecast, Anthony, hang on just a second. The intensity forecast is something that they still have a tough time with, and we've seen it a number of times where sorry, losing my train of thought here for a second. They do this, they've said this a number of times, and we've seen it a number of times where systems are forecast not to strengthen and they do, and we've seen it the other way where they forecast to strengthen and they don't. John Samaru, good info on the storm. What can we do to help us in the future? Okay, I'm not understanding that. So if you could be a little clearer on what you're asking, I would appreciate it. By the way, Anthony is moderating, so as always, everybody needs to be on their semi-best behavior. Patrick McGill, did I appreciate the kind words? Thank you. Yes, definitely busy. Grandson not here today. Jetstream predictions for the southeast. Roy Wilson. Ridge in the east, pretty much all through the period. Striper season definitely coming, Ed Richardson, that's for sure. I'm sorry, Roy. Back to you. Jetstream predictions for the southeast. Yeah, I mean, we're still gonna, you're still gonna have that ridge is gonna be trying to hold on in some fashion, although not overly strong. I was kind of hoping that the models were right from what they showed last week with an amplified trough and a really solid push of cool air coming down from the north, going all the way down into the Gulf states and Florida and down into Texas. But we've seemed to have backed off from that. Doesn't mean it won't get cool up our way. It just won't be as far south as you might like it. Down tonight in the 50s and even the 40s in inland areas in north and west of the warmer urban centers. 5,000 subscribers with no videos for tomorrow morning. And the dew points are going to be pretty low tomorrow, which is really nice. And so will the temperatures, because we're probably not going to get much out of the 60s, especially in areas where we have clouds for the next couple of days, and maybe even through a good chunk of Tuesday until the warm front goes by. All right, coming up on 5 o'clock Eastern time, as I, as I said often enough, and I'll say again, if you're watching this on a replay, any radars that we show you or references to severe weather, it is dated at the time you watch it. So you want to get your latest information by going to the National Weather Service website at weather.gov and going to your local National Weather Service page. Remember, again, those of you who are interested to subscribe to my Patreon site, the link is on the chat and it's on the descriptor to this video. And of course, if you are shopping at Amazon, here's my Amazon link. Again, you get your stuff. It doesn't cost you an extra dime. And we get Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin. Do I have a second favorite cigar? Asks Scott Briller. I love the La Flor Dominica 700 Maduro. Uh, I guess if I can't find those, um, I will probably smoke a Perdomo. I like a 60 ring gauge, which is the size. I like the fatter cigar versus a smaller, narrower one. So um, they measure them. They call them ring gauges, and 60s of fairly large size. I will be in Springfield at the Springfield Library in New Jersey on Wednesday, October 17th at 7 o'clock. For those of you in New Jersey, please come out and contact the library ahead of time and let them know you're coming, because I don't know how much space is available. And if you're on Long Island on Tuesday, October the 9th, I will be at the Bayport Blue Point Library in Bayport Blue Point, and that's east of Patchogue on the South Shore of Long Island in Suffolk County. John Burke, I am not, and I've said this before, I will say it again. With respect to the long range, it's not my thing. I have a very tough time getting my head around it. It's highly technical. You got to look at a lot of stuff, and frankly, it's never really interested me as much as the short range. I really like to sink my teeth into weather while it's going on and it's within um, 10 days or 2 weeks. Particularly inside the 10-day period. I'm a short-term. I call myself a short-term guy versus a long-term guy. I don't know. Yeah, it's just there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I like to look at some of the stuff. We look at uh, the indices, the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, the Pacific North America pattern, the PNA, the East Pacific Oscillation, the EPO. Um, but the long range guys really get into it, and they're looking at winds at like 10 millibars, and I'm still trying to kind of understand that. Michael Azaro, I was wondering what storm made you the most nervous in your career. Well, I would say the Sandy. Uh, Sandy really was the one that made me nervous. It was the first one and I've worked pretty much every major storm since the mid 1980s. Uh, in my time here up in the New York area, New York, New Jersey, Long Island area. And, we've had some whoppers along the way, but Sandy was one that looked serious in the long range as it evolved. And then once it became clear to me when we were inside about 7 days that this was going to be a big deal, I got nervous. And it was the first time that I did not, I turned down work to stay home because I didn't feel comfortable leaving my family at home while this was going on. And, that night was a little nerve-wracking. I don't live near the shore, so I didn't have a coastal flooding issue, but the wind here was an issue. We had a lot of tree damage, and I didn't, but all around me, a lot of tree damage. The next day, trees falling into houses, trees falling into cars, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but I could hear my house moaning with the wind that was just unrelenting that night. So that made me very nervous, and it made me very nervous for the whole area. And the other one to some degree, but it's a little less so because snow does melt, was the blizzard of 1996 or the blizzard of 96, mainly because that was the first really big storm in for all of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic since the blizzard of '83. And actually, I take that back because we did have the superstorm in '93, in March of '93, but for the coastal areas, that wound up being less up to a foot, and then it changed over to rain before it ended. It was really more for the inland areas that got crazy snow amounts with that. But the '96 blizzard was really the first one since the '83 that was for the Mid-Atlantic and much of the Northeast, a widespread burial. I was not here for the '83 blizzard. I was working in Corpus Christi at the time, but I was nervous for a 2 foot snowfall, and it wound up being exactly that. Joseph Mayano, you're getting married on Thursday. You've got some models. That next front, when you asked me the other day, I told you the issue was going to be whether the front stalls out or not. And uh, we've got some models stalling it. We've got some models moving things along. If it moves along, you'll be fine on Thursday. But I'm a little concerned because of the fact that the push from Canada of the dry air is taking longer and longer to evolve. So that there's a shot that that front may stall out, and you may have some showers at least for the first part of the day on Thursday. Maybe it moves along for the second part, but you know what? Check back tomorrow, and we'll see if there's been some changes. I wish I could have offer you a better outlook for your wedding day, but unfortunately, we're in this pattern lately where these fronts get toward us toward the East Coast, and they start to slow down and stall. And this one, the one for the middle part of the week, kind of looks like the same idea. So we'll see. But come back tomorrow, and if you want, you can message me on Facebook, and I'll certainly keep you abreast of what's going on. No problem there. All right, folks. Thanks very much for being here today. Really appreciate it. I'm sorry for the technical issues that I had, but it happens. What can I tell you? Uh, we'll live stream again at some point tomorrow. Weekends, by the way, I like to take it a little easy after sticking to a schedule all week, and I've got things to do and catch up on. So the live streams wind up coming on at perhaps odd times. So just bear with me. When I can, I will schedule. I'll put it up. I'll schedule the live stream so it shows up on my channel page, and then you can see when the next live stream is coming up, and be ready. And then, of course, make sure your notifications are turned on. And if you're a Patreon member, by the way, you get notified that I'm doing a live stream, so you get notified twice. All right, so you won't miss it. Have a great evening, folks. We'll see you tomorrow.